evening and welcome to our latest Indic Book Club Author Q&A. And I am especially delighted to introduce today's author, Saiswaroopa Iyer. And Saiswaroopa is an author who began her journey in 2015 with her first book, Abhaya. She followed that up in 2017 with her second book, Avishi. Her third book followed a year later, Mori. And immediately after that, in 2019, her book Draupadi was published by Rupa Publishers. And in 2020, she curated an anthology of 10 relatively unknown stories unknown battles from the Mahabharata, and which also introduced to the world 10 new, bright, brilliant authors. And this was published by Bloomsbury. And now, just about less than a month back, her latest book, Rukmini, Krishna's Wife, has launched. And you can see a cover of that book behind Sai, as well as on my virtual background. And there she is holding a copy of, and it's got, so the book is not only an excellent, wonderful book, but it's got, praise, and rightfully so, from a wide variety of authors, including the best-selling author Amish Tripathi. So with that, welcome Sai to our Indic Book Club Author Q&A.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Abhinav. It's being home.
So, since we are, Indic Book Club, I am going to ask you questions that a lot of, our members and other people are interested. But let me first begin by reading out a short blurb of your book, Rukmini. And it says, part history, part legend, part sacred lore. Rukmini will leave the readers spellbound. A princess, a lover, a goddess, an overarching emperor thought he would use her as a pawn. Her eldest brother became a tool of her enemy. In her own family, she had none to call her own, but Rukmini, the princess of Vidarbha, made a choice. She would not bow down to patriarchy. The story of Rukmini is often overshadowed by the glorious exploits of her charismatic husband, Krishna Vasudev. For the very first time, this novel gives Rukmini her due. It portrays the life of the feisty bride who made bold choices not only while eloping with her beloved, but all through her life to become a resplendent goddess, a fitting partner to the most beloved god of the land. And I can say that the book, does not only a marvelous, but a very moving, evocative, journey through Rukmini's life. And I want to start off with that question. So I can see that there's a conscious choice to tell this as Rukmini's story from Rukmini's point of view. This is not Krishna and his exploits with Rukmini as a witness to those events. This is Rukmini's life, and everyone else is a part of that journey of her life. So how difficult was it to write a story, to write a book on a character that is so closely associated with Krishna and yet keep it her story?
So yes, Abhinav, it was quite, I would say, a challenge that I really enjoyed because it's not about keeping, the challenge was not exactly about keeping Rukmini in the, on the center stage, but about being conscious about Krishna's presence all around. Right, and that's Krishna is someone who we cannot undermine, even with the most malicious intent. He is someone who comes out so strongly, and it's almost every entry of Krishna, every dialogue of Krishna, because the whole greatness of Rukmini hinged upon how Krishna is portrayed, and vice versa. So that's what was I wouldn't like to use the word challenge here, but that's what kept me alive and conscious over every sentence I used to type, because I found that constant need to hear what I was about to type. I had to hear it from from some plane of my mind as to it has to look like Krishna is talking. It has to look like Rukmini is talking. It has to look like they existed in the times of Mahabharata, and there has to be that resonance between all the all the whole of that dynamics, as well as there has to be a resonance with myself and hopefully the reader. So this is what kept me, if not I wouldn't again call it a challenge, but the level of my consciousness was really at its peak while I was writing with me.
I That's a very interesting phrase. You and the bit that you talked about. You want plane of consciousness that you wrote with. I'll park. I have, I think, two questions around that. I'll park one of them for the second part. But the first one is, uh, how did the inspiration for the story begin? Because if you've written, all your books have been about female characters, whether it was a fictional character with your first book Abhya, or the brief mention of this girl with a prosthetic leg in Avishi that that you weaved an entire tale of adventure around that. They've always been about female protagonists. And if you talk of Krishna, there is no shortage of one can very easily talk about Radha. Your previous book Draupadi also has pivotal events of her life connected with Krishna. So was it just a natural, logical choice to pick Rukmini, or how did that inspiration strike you?
So when I started talking with my publisher, even before Draupadi, right, Rukmini was our first choice uh, back in 2017-18. Rukmini was the first choice, in fact.
I see.
But yes, but by the time we finalized the contract, somehow we zeroed down on Draupadi. And by the like in the interim period, Rukmini had taken birth and become so strong, so compelling that she almost made a gate crashing entry into Draupadi, if you remember. So
Correct.
there were a lot of readers who said, okay, for those two scenes, it was Rukmini all along. So, maybe we should, look forward for a book on Rukmini. And it was like, again, like, I would say a godsend opportunity, because the publisher came back asking for Rukmini, and that day I remember happened to be a Friday, and Friday I usually chant Lalita Sahasranama as well as Kanakadhara Stotram. And the Kanakadhara Stotram has this line, Namostu Nandatmaja Vallabhaya, and that was the day I again got a proposal from the publisher to write a book on Rukmini, and I just grabbed it with both my hands.
So, a creative urge met a divine intervention is, I think, what it strikes me. And well, how can one go wrong with the combination such as that? Uh, so, I want to talk about you said and we are told that when his father, I think Rukmak, they had very strong opinions on how Rukmani's life should proceed. And then once she marries Krishna and becomes a part of that, family and all, there's a different side to Rukmani that we see.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about that part?
So from the way I could envision Rukmini's life, right? The times of Mahabharata, there is I know a lot of people who gloss over Mahabharata miss the central character called Jarasandha. From a point of view of the Kaurava Pandava dynamics, his exit is rather too early. Jarasandha's exit is rather too early. But if you actually look at the history of ancient India at that time, Jarasandha was a figure to reckon. he had dominated, his domination over India was not through conquests, not through Rajasuyas and all that, but through these marital alliances. He would interfere into the internal affairs of each of these kingdoms. If somebody appears to him as a threat, he would subtly try to win the other promising nemesis over to his side, or try to weaken him by strengthening his enemy with a marital alliance. And consequentially, the other two kings would ally with him, and he could negotiate, or he could prevail over whatever was the conflict. So this happened for one whole generation, right? Like the good example, which we need to study Bhagavatam and Mahabharata side by side to observe these things, or rather Harivamsham and Mahabharata. So Pandu Pandu was a very powerful king. Till destiny sent him back, to the forest. Pandu was, he would have been a very promising answer to Jarasandha. Which is why we also see Jarasandha trying to gain a foothold over the Kuru region by getting his daughters married to Kamsa. Right? Otherwise, from a very macro point of view, Kamsa is nothing. I mean, why would a powerful king like Jarasandha give his two daughters to a very small Yadava? No, and Kamsa was not even the overlord of.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's actually Kamsa grew on the back of Jarasandha, which is, which means that Jarasandha wanted Kamsa to grow and hopefully become a pain in the neck to the Kurus, so that Kurus stand back. And probably he had other plans for the other powerful kingdom, that is Panchala. So that way, then he already had engineered so many alliances, and had his indirect control over so many kingdoms, and the whole thing controlled, went on for the whole generation, that is Pandu's generation. And then our friends come in, the Kauravas, Pandavas, Krishna, and Rukmini's generation, which is when we should acknowledge that Rukmini's rebellion put a full stop to Jarasandha's juggernaut.
And that is why, because of the alliance, or because what do you call because of Shishupal.
Yes. So probably Chedi was already allied to him, and he had, dominated over Vidarbha. We hear through military means, and then he just wanted to cement it by by marrying Rukmini and Shishupala, so that Vidarbha will not have guts to rebel against him, anytime in future. Because Chedi, Shishupala will be grateful. Probably he had similar plans for Rukmi, from some princess from somewhere married to Rukmi, and both of them would be his minions, and basically his control over India is strong for another generation. So that was that could have been Jarasandha's plan, and his plan came to full stop at two places. One is Krishna killing Kamsa. Krishna killing Kamsa ensured that Kurus got back control over their land. I mean, there were nobody to challenge the Kurus on in this Ganga Yamuna, between the Yamuna and Ganga plains, basically. So that's a fertile land. That's something for us to note. So, and once the Kurus are powerful, there is a little bit of pause in the whole journey of Jarasandha, in the trajectory of Jarasandha. There is a flattening of his trajectory, and then Panchalas, right? They had to. Krishna had to see that Panchalas, whatever happens, Panchalas don't go and ally with Jarasandha, and things happened. Yeah.
Correct. And Jarasandha was one of the people, one of the kings who had come to Draupadi's Swamvar. The
I know.
Mahabharata tells us.
Yes, yes. And if I remember, I don't exactly remember from the critical edition, but it's a horrific uh, visual. Abhinav, one of the regional Mahabharata tales. So for that Swayamvar of Draupadi, Jarasandha, who's like equal, equal in age to her grandfather, he tried. His son Sahadeva, he tried and failed. I mean, both of them failed, thankfully. And his grandson tried and failed.
Oh my God.
So, you just look at the stakes in there. I mean, we all blame Yudhishthira for his gambling and all, but nobody thinks about Drupada.
That was a gamble that thankfully, didn't go awry like, Yudhishthir's gamble. So essentially, that decision of Rukmini to first of all say upfront that she had no interest in marrying, and she has some very, very interesting descriptions and words for Shishupal in your book. But first of all, she said she had no interest in marrying Shishupal. And secondly, she doesn't stop just there. She sends her trusted, how should I say it, a trusted elder to Krishna as her messenger, which is, this is something that, because the discovery would have resulted not only in possible death for the messenger, but also, severe consequences for Rukmini. And yet she went ahead and she took that decision.
Yeah, that takes a lot of bravery and, that risk appetite on anyone's part, which is why Rukmini came out as this very feisty and rebellious feisty and a very strong lady in, the way I saw things or the way I could visualize it, that could appear as a, starking contrast to the traditional portrayal of Rukmini along, the classic literature, the classical age literature as we see. Yes, because the presence of the messenger here is a very important aspect, which gives a lot of legitimacy to Rukmini's choice. Right, because I know in the whole 8 vivaha construct, right, if Rukmini's consent was violated, if she was forced, kind of physically forced into that wedding, it would have become a paisachika vivaha, though it would have been given an appearance of a Brahma or Deva Vivaha with all those rituals and all going on, right? But it's in reality a Paisachika Vivaha if she is forced down into that wedding, right? And the entry of our Agnidyotana, in South he is called Agnidyotana. I don't know exactly. He has a different name in the northern texts, but his entry as a Brahmana, a very learned person, he would not, that somebody seeped into Shastras would not allow a Paisachika Vivaha to happen, right? So there is a, yes. So that way, this Agnidyotana comes across as a very, dedicated Brahman who is actually dedicated and committed to his Shastraic knowledge, which is why we see him actively encouraging an elopement, because that elopement has the consent of the bride. That's better than forcing a woman into a wedlock that she doesn't want to, because gods get angry when a woman is forced into a wedlock out of her, without her consent. Gods get angry, and that's what Shastras tell us, right? And so it's what do you say, that's something which we need to keep in mind, because the traditional portrayal of Brahmins is that they stick with a lot of conservative this one side or whatever, but here we see a Brahmin encouraging a princess to rebel against her family and facilitating her elopement. And surprisingly, Rukmini Kalyana is one episode, especially in Andhra Pradesh, in the Telugu states, and probably even in the neighboring states. Unmarried girls are encouraged to read the story of Rukmini so that they get a good husband.
Fascinating. And on this question or on this point, right? So I think one of the points that comes across is that there is no substitute to reading our texts in their original or at least their unabridged form, because as we have seen, retellings or these so-called mithya tellings and all that we see, they tend to cause more damage and distortions than serve their purpose, and that's a tragedy, because our unabridged texts have a very different and bold take on our traditions. And in that, I wanted to ask you about two things. One is that one sort of a pivotal or a key episode that a lot of, in fact, when I was looking this up on the net, I actually saw that M.T. Ramarao had starred in a movie on this episode, and you know what I'm referring to. So that is missing from your book. I was a little curious, obviously that was a conscious decision choice on your part. So I want to understand why you chose to skip that. And once you answer that, I'll move on to my next one.
Sure, I'll need some bandwidth to answer that, because it took a lot from me to bypass that particular episode. So the episode that we are talking about is is popularly known as Tulabhara, or Parijata Paharanam. So this comes as a very small chapter in the Harivamsham. Uh, so at least it's there in the Telugu Harivamsham. So and also in, I think, in the Vishnu Purana as well. But what happens there is that there is, post Narakasura Vadha, Narakasura is killed by Krishna as well as Satyabhama, and Satyabhama is enjoying the, fame and popularity that brought her, because, she killed a demon who was harassing so many women, and she was basically at the top of her popularity at that time. And in that juncture, when Narada brings a flower, a parijata flower from the Swarga, and he tells Krishna, ki, you should give us to the most deserving, give this flower to the most deserving of your wives.
So this is unsurprisingly Narad Muni at doing what he did best.
Exactly. So, that movie is actually a very beautiful movie. It's called Sri Krishna Tulabharamo, but each character is done justice so very well, from the aesthetics as well as spiritual significance of, that each of them wielded. So. So he says, give this flower to the most beautiful, most deserving of your wives. And I think logically everybody would expect Krishna to give that to Satyabhama, because she scored him such a big victory, right? And he surprises everyone by giving it to Rukmini. And understandably, Satyabhama is so angry, and she makes Krishna gift her the whole of Parijata tree.
Okay.
So, yeah. Basically, they go to the Swargaloka and demand the Parijata tree, and there is a bit of a struggle between the fight between Indra and Krishna, and then Aditi, Mother Aditi, she comes in between and convinces Indra to give Parijata to her. And there is a warning that Shachi Devi gives. Ki Parijata is a wish fulfilling tree. It doesn't measure your karma, and you are taking, and this is supposed to be in a land where people come to enjoy their merits. So you acquire punya, you go to Swarga, and you demand whatever you want from the Parijata tree. There is a balance, but now you are taking it to a zone which runs on karma, so it's bound to cause imbalance. That's that's the best lesson that I learned from the whole reading the whole this one. And now the Parijata tree comes, and still Satyabhama is so what do you say, insecure. And then she arranges for this Tulabhara. That is, it's a vrata where she gives away her husband in dana to,
Correct.
yeah, to Narada here again. And to win back her husband, she has to give Narada equivalent of gold or riches equivalent to Krishna's weight.
Correct.
Yeah, this is where all her gold from the Syamantaka money and whatever her financial genius she acquired, everything goes waste, and she has to turn to Rukmini to help her. And Rukmini just keeps a tulasi dala, and the whole balance that equals Krishna's weight. So basically, it's a, what do you say? It's a story that tells the message of that gives the message of Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam Yome Bhakta. That's a shloka from the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, with that true surrender of heart, if you can offer me a leaf or a flower or even water, I'll be happy with that. So the whole story is basically a demonstration of that one shloka from the Bhagavad Gita. Now, my problem with this story, I don't have a problem with the episode as such. It has beautiful lessons and beautiful aesthetics built into it. But my problem with reconciling this particular episode with the macro picture of Mahabharata, right? First of all, this doesn't contribute to the arc of Rukmini. Rukmini, the way she starts out at the beginning of Tulabhara story as a devoted wife who is not at all insecure, who is perfectly in balance with what Krishna does. She's in resonance and balance with Krishna does. Uh, and it is Satyabhama's journey. So the story rightfully belongs to Satyabhama and not to Rukmini here. So, and the craft, the demand of storytelling craft, it is that the central character undergoes a transformation. So the whole story of Tulabharam doesn't add or subtract anything from Rukmini. She's what she is. That's one thing. The other thing is about the whole dynamics of Mahabharata itself. Like there is the Rajasuya has happened, as well as then it is very quickly followed by this game of dice, which has put the whole fate of Bharat Varsha into uncertainty. We don't know who will ditch which side, who will shift sides, or if there new battles that are going to come, like say Kekaya divided. So Kekaya is related to Krishna. The princess of Kekaya is married to Krishna. In her family, there was a divide, and her 5 brothers come to the Pandava side, and the other side goes to the Kaurava side. And then there are many more such family feuds which added their weight with divided sides. Magadha had a breakup. There were so many kingdoms that had these kind of feuds, and each of them chose sides. And in that kind of impending I would say doom, it's like destruction is closing upon Bharatvarsha. And in that juncture, I could not picturize a household rivalry within Krishna's wives. And the way Satyabhama made her appearance itself in my story was, as a very strong pillar of support to Rukmini. I couldn't picturize them fighting.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I want to shift, and I think we'll also want to leave time for Q&A because we already have, I think, 3 or 4 questions coming in. And once people, they can put in their questions through the chat button or the Q&A functionality, we'll take that. But I have to ask you now, you brought that up about the craft of storytelling. And this is also related to the second part or the second question I said I wanted to ask, which is now, we all know the story, how and especially how it's going to end. And Gandhari's curse could not be wished away, nor could the foolishness of Sambha be wished away by doing what he did and inviting the curse from the sages, how do you manage that transition without without either softening the story, or since it is your story you're telling, how and also without taking those creative liberties that can cross over into distortions, if I may use the word.
Okay, that's I think there are two parts to this question. One is about creative liberty as, the way storytellers of this particular genre should use creative liberty. I'll handle that first. So it's an open question, Abhinav. It's like, I think each storyteller has to face this question of how much creative liberty is justified, right? That is something which we answer to our own conscience. But an interesting conclusion that I arrived with respect to creative liberty is that in reality, it is not liberty, it is limitation. So Vedavyasa visualized, or actually has witnessed the whole thing which he wrote, right? He could write it with that authority. I mean, he himself is Vishnu, and he could write everything with a certain authority. Now, as storytellers, we have two choices. We can try and revisualize everything, which takes the amount of say tapasya or sadhana it takes is a lot. Or we can simply summarize and retell, which is great, because we need retailers who don't take too many don't take too many deviations as well, like say Rajagopalachari did his Mahabharata, and because those reading those 5,000 6,000 page critical editions is a daunting job for a normal person, but anybody can be comfortable with the story of Mahabharata, Bhagavata, Ramayana by reading Rajaji's summaries.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's about retailers. But about storytellers who want to revisualize as well as look at the story from a contemporary sensibility, right? That's what storytellers have been doing
correct
along centuries. It's not like we 21st century novelists became smart enough to question Veda Vyasa. It's not like that. But like the whole prabandha literature written in the 15th 16th centuries, say all the court poets of Krishna Devaraya, like say the Parijata Paharana itself, right? It's a small chapter in Harivamsham expanded into a whole work of, I don't know, hundreds of poems. It creates new characters. It has conversations between characters which reflect the sensibilities of 15th century. So basically, these works will definitely have a chapter on how a state is administered, and they take the opportunity to glorify Sri Krishna Devaraya. He deserves all glorification, but we can see that the whole purpose, or one of the purposes of writing that work is fleshing out whatever is happening in that particular time period from the eyes of our timeless characters. Our it can be Krishna Narada or Krishna Vyasa, or or these Varudhini Pravara or anybody. So the whole exercise here is about internalizing what Vedavyasa has originally written. I mean, when I say Vedavyasa, I intend to include Valmiki as well as an Itihasa writer. So it's about understanding and going so deeply understanding what they have written enough to apply it into a different Desha Kala Paristhiti. Right, so it's a literary as well as you can say a philosophical or a spiritual, literary, socio-political exercise.
So here's a question, right? So yes, there is a creative liberty, there is an artistic license, and then you said, applying it to the socio-political context, the Deshkala Paristhiti that you said. So that is obviously, completely understandable. And unless and until an author is bringing their own perspective, their own creativity to it, they might as well be doing a translation from the original. They in which case would have nothing new to add. But when one is retelling it, keeping the current socio-political context in mind, isn't there, I mean, how do you strike a balance, or how do you guard against bringing in agendas? And I mean agendas both positive and negative. And we have seen
Yes.
umpteen examples of authors bringing in their own negative agendas, trying to, judge a text and characters thousands of years in the past using some woke social constructs of the 21st century. Those are extreme examples, admittedly, but
Yes.
there's a content. This is a continuum, right? So how do you know you are still within this? It's strictly speaking, if you look at it, it's a line in the sand, and you know it only when you cross it. But how do you, as a writer, keep that in mind?
So one thing here, I don't have exactly a logical answer here, Abhinav, because at the end of the day, Rukmini, Krishna, or even the smallest character in the book have to accept what my prayers to them are, and I need to hear it back. Unless the storyteller hears it back from the characters, I don't think there will be a balance between the content and what is being shown. That is where I will not take names of very good writers. I mean, very good writers, as you said, started peddling their agenda, when into these stories. And I mean both, people who are pro Indic civilization and people who are diehard anti Indic civilization, if I can say that. uh, when we reach a place where the author's agenda starts speaking, the reader will find that out. He'll suddenly stop hearing Rukmini and start hearing Saiswaroopa,
Yes, I
right?
suppose,
Yes.
correct. I suppose that, that in itself is a topic for an entire talk in itself. But before I move to the Q&A, I want to ask some questions on the craft of writing. So obviously, since your first book in 2015, and I'm tempted to ask you whether your career as an investment professional and Excel worksheets is what turned you towards such a creative writer. But talking about, and such a prolific writer since 2015, right? There's been a book coming out almost every year. Tell us something about the craft of writing itself. And I know that a lot of people often enough have this question. Some try and they read and they try and improve. Some of them struggle with that journey of because knowledge of the subject is one thing, but putting it in the confines of a 200, 250, 300 page book,
Yes.
that engages a reader, right? That in itself is a very different thing that sometimes I think a lot of upcoming writers underestimate. Tell us something about that.
So the craft of writing here is basically, now I would want to point out the difference between Indic storytelling and the modern storytelling, the commercial storytelling, which has its roots in Western storytelling. My simple way of differentiating is pull and push from our management models. Right. So the original Bhagavata, as well as even Ramayana and Mahabharata and the whole Puranas, they had a listener with an adhikara. And Parikshit, when he sought the story of Bhagavatam from Shuka Bhagavan, he did not he left his life, basically his daily life. He dedicated himself to hearing whatever Shukadeva has got to tell him, not because Parikshit did not know. I mean, he's the grandson of the sister of Krishna, right? So he knows the story of Krishna. It's not possible that he doesn't know it, right? But he saw the value in Shuka's interpretation of what was documented by Vedavyasa. which is why he was, with an open mind, he just sat with that surrender. Same with Janmejaya. I mean, he is obviously he would know the story of his own great grandfathers. They would have told him, number of times. But Vaishampayana had something to add, and he trusts Vaishampayana to give him something of value. So he left his kingdom affairs, whatever, to his brothers, sat with Vaishampayana for 15 days, 21 days, whatever. And so here the listener is not in a hurry. So,
Correct.
yes,
Correct.
Shuka and Vaishampayana had that luxury of expanding over the central messages, whatever messages that come from each story. But in the modern world, we are targeting readers who, firstly, who may not even know the story, who may not know the value of the story, or who are fed wrong notions of the story. So basically, we are just trying to get their attention. So for that attention, we need hooks. Hook is the technical word used in the craft of writing. So when you say even the blurb, when it says for the first time this book does justice to Rukmini, it sounds very arrogant, to be honest on my part. But that's an attempt to create a hook that this is a story which you may not have heard. So that creates an interest. And once, then the starting of the story has to, introduce the whole problem, or, whatever that world faces, or the journey that the author, the protagonist has to undertake, or like say Rukmini, the whole journey is now, at least the first part, her journey is about finding her way to Krishna, escaping Shishupala and Jarasandha. And then the second part would be about how she puts up with the changing dynamics. So that's again with Abhaya, it was about the how Narakasura, the Bhauma, was trying to weave his strategy over Bharatvarsha, and
Correct.
how Abhaya is. It's the same with each story, which follows a certain formula. So coming to the craft, right? So we introduce a character who has stakes like any normal reader has. Right?
Okay.
Yes, we try and connect the normal reader to our central character. It's in a normal life, and then there is an inciting incident, right? I mean, Rukmini is introduced as a princess, so probably a bit spoiled, or pampered, because she's the youngest after so many brothers. We don't come across a mother, so as a pampered princess, a girl child with strong opinions is somebody we always love. But what makes her get out of her daily life and act is, her fixing of her wedding with Shishupala, which that is something she has to escape from, and there her journey starts. So that is that inciting incident is what defines our story, and that's what makes the reader root for the character. And the beautiful aspect of Mahabharata is that it suits Indic storytelling as well as the modern storytelling. It suits push and pull in such a perfect way, right? And then there are these game changers where one game changer happens in the favor of the protagonist, and there is another game changer that happens in the favor of the antagonist, and then there is a whole conflict. So Mahabharata is as if, it's designed for that storytelling, which keeps the reader interested, which is why we haven't lost interest in Mahabharata, and still we see Arjuna fan club and Karna fan club coming to blows.
Absolutely. So let me move to some questions now, because there are some very interesting questions that have come up. Arjun Narayanan has a question. He says, the cult of Satyabhama is very strong in the South, especially in dance and music in Andhra. Did any of those musical works inspire your work?
So, hello Arjun, nice to see you here. But
And
yeah,
and
uh,
uh, he has another question, or maybe go ahead with this one, Sai, and then
sure.
we'll take his second question up.
Sure. So there is the presence of Satyabhama in Indian dance, especially South Indian dance, is very Satyabhama has a significant presence. Basically, in Kuchipudi, which is Andhra version of it's not it's a variant of Bharatanatyam, but with a lot of grace and aesthetics, which are very unique to Kuchipudi. So there, the last item that a guru teaches his disciple, is called Bharma Kalapam. So it's set into a raga called Bhairavi, and says when it has Satyabhama declaring what about her managed to make her favorite of Krishna. So the word Bhama Kalapam itself is a household word in many of rooted families. So yes, and then adding to that, you have the whole Narakasura incident where Satyabhama is uh, believed to have killed Narakasura, or at least supported Krishna while killing Narakasura. So, and the tradition believes that Satyabhama is Bhudevi, while Rukmini is Sri Devi or Lakshmi. Satyabhama is Bhudevi, and each of the Vaishnava kshetras have Vishnu, this Kalyanotsava, where Vishnu is married to both of them. In Tirupati, Kalyanotsava happens every day, and every day he is married to Sri Devi and Bhudevi. And Satyabhama is probably a greater favorite because of her journey. Basically, Rukmini has a flatter journey compared to Satyabhama, who has a steeper internal journey, if if I can use that
Correct.
word. So yes, Satyabhama is very dear to all South Indians and probably North Indians who are aware of the whole aesthetic surrounding her. And I grew up with those works, Abhinav. So I think they did influence me. It's hard to say they did not influence me. They influenced the entry, the way Satyabhama appeared to me in Rukmini was like, I could not forget that it is Bhudevi. And Bhudevi is a symbol of resilience, patience, and not because, she's a submissive or anything, because one earthquake is all it takes for her to put us in our place. So it's not so Bhudevi's resilience doesn't come from submissiveness, it comes from excessive strength, right? Which is why
Fascinating.
so I could not visualize Satyabhama as somebody spoiled and attention seeking the way she has been portrayed. This whole belief that she is Bhudevi made me look at Satyabhama in another way. And
So
coming to Radha,
correct. That is Arjun's second
yes.
question.
So Radha is again, K.M. Munshi ji in his Krishnavatara, he says Radha is a problem child of Indian imagination. Because Bhagavatam does not mention her except for some very one shloka which doesn't even mention her name. Bhagavatam mentions her as the one lady with whom Krishna disappears, leaving all the other gopikas during his Rasa Leela. And the later Puranas make a guess that she is Radha. Mahabharata, no mention. Vishnu Purana, no mention. So probably the first mention of Radha we find is in Brahma Vaivarta Purana and Devi Bhagavatam. In Devi Bhagavatam, Goloka is like another Vaikuntha, or there Krishna is not Vishnu. Krishna is an independent god you know who is equivalent to Devi, the supreme goddess, in his knowledge or in his divinity, right? Even Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are shown as somebody, dependent on the Adi Shakti, but Krishna is shown as her equal, and Radha is his consort in Goloka. So the traditional scholars, the way they have reconciled both are by looking at Radha as the Gupta Naika. So basically, she is Krishna's Ahladini Shakti. So where Krishna smiles, it is because Radha is with him. So portraying Radha here will need us to get into another plane.
I see.
Yes. So we will not see Radha coming and contending with any of Krishna's gross concerts. That's the Ashtabharyas. So she is present, always present in a subtler plane. That's how we can interpret or reconcile both these narratives.
Fascinating. Dr. Rajshri Vasudevan has a question. He asks, Namaste, can you elaborate on the conscious choices you made in choosing some aspects over others in the writing of this book? And I think you briefly touched upon that in the arc of the story, and whose point of view and whether it adds, or what do you want to add anything to that, Sai?
One thing I would like to add to the benefit of writers who would want to attempt this genre. See, there is a fashion or something where some kind of a craze where the writer wants to portray gods as mortals, right? Mortals with no magical power, and right, I mean, I won't judge that attitude, because great people, great writers who have given us classics over the last 5-6 decades have experimented this model, like the best of them being S.L. Bhairapparu. In his Parva, there is no mention of divinity, and it's an immortal classic. That's something no Mahabharata enthusiast should miss reading. But with my limited experience, what I would say about writers attempting this whole divinity rational, this one is to go with what they can visualize, and don't decide, don't make a decision in the beginning of your story to portray a god as man or man as god, or whatever, because yes, it is not possible for us to visualize god as is, like Krishna's whole divinity. None of us can actually visualize his Vishwarupa, say, to people who he showed Vishwarupa, like say Arjuna or Devaki when he was born in Bhagavatam. Both of them prayed Krishna to get back to his normal form, so that this is a truth that we are not able to bear. So get us back into that world of Maya, where you are my friend, you are my son. uh, so let me enjoy being your mother, or let me enjoy being your friend or cousin, or this one. So
Correct.
they could not handle that truth, right? So as writers, I think we should stay open to that divinity, and divinity will have its way of showing itself in the stories, provided we don't decide at the beginning. That's my one advice to writers.
So in some ways, you're saying, you're asking such, you're asking authors to write on such topics to check their ego outside the door, and write with this some humility and less of ego, that I shall do what has not been done before.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's what will happen, when you try and stay humble, and not let the author come and cover the character, right? Something unique will come out. That has been a personal experience, as well as I don't know. I'm not qualified enough to advise, or set standards and guidelines to writers. But this is what I have experienced. So just
Correct. Very
taking the
true.
liberty to share.
So, Pranshu has a couple of questions, can Jarasandh be seen as a Yudhishthira or Dharmaraj of the opposing philosophy? He ruthlessly used his power, his connections, and Sam, Dam, Dandabhed. A Kautilya-like figure, not suited for Dwapar, maybe a Kalyug Dharmaraj come too early. And he says that Jain Nemit Charitra has the story Jarasandh attempted an alliance with Vasudev and then went for the next best option, which was Kansa. So this again shows a soft glove approach by Jarasandh. And that's a fascinating question, a conjecture in itself. That was he a Dharmaraj more suited for Kalyug rather than and in Dwapar the best he could be was be the Dharmaraj of the adharmic side.
So, in a way, I cannot exactly state with authority on the Yuga Dharmas and the match there. But yes, in the last couple of days, last couple of weeks, with the second wave of pandemic raging and the way we are seeing narratives against India, there have been times where I have, where we can think somebody like Jarasandha should have been here on the helm, to teach these guys a lesson. But yes, because he exits too early in the Mahabharata, we are not exactly able to appreciate his the whole because the antagonist or Pratinarayana in our epics. Pratinarayana is the one who makes Narayana, who inspires the birth of Narayana into an avatara, and he cannot be all that is bad. He's not evil. He is greatness gone wrong. Hiranyakashipu is greatness gone wrong. Ravana is greatness gone wrong.
Correct. And in terms of the Mahajanpads that existed at that time, if you leave aside Narakasur, perhaps Jarasandh was the most powerful Mahajanpad at the time.
Politically, it will be safe for us to say Jarasandha is one of the most powerful. Because we see again, I cannot say it with authority, but Bhishma and Jarasandha never clashed, and Bhishma is such a feared warrior. But even he did not think of putting Jarasandha in his place unless Pranchu has some incident from his reading, because to other viewers I would say Pranchu is one of the writers in Unsung Valor, and he's written a beautiful story about Yudhamanyu and Uttamaujas defeating Duryodhana, and he's another living Wikipedia of our Puranic knowledge. So if unless you have something from somewhere, Pranchu, I don't think Bhishma and Jarasandha clashed anywhere, and that itself is a clue about Jarasandha's power. Even Bhishma did not want to risk. Pandu did not want to risk.
Correct. And even Yudhishthira didn't want to risk. He was essentially he had to be. There's an entire there's several chapters in I think the Sabha Parva where Krishna convinces Yudhishthira to do that. Yes. But Pranchu has one more question, and he asks, was Rukmini the first of the wives of Krishna or the most prominent? Her status as Krishna's Patarani is quality-wise or just chronological?
I am more inclined to say it is quality-wise. It may be chronological the way we we read Bhagavatam. It looks chronological as well as quality-wise, because we see a whole change in dynamics once Rukmini is married to Krishna. There are other princesses who followed her suit, like say Mitravinda. Mitravinda also eloped with Krishna, and who else? Jambavati, more or less, that was also where Krishna defeats Jambavan and marries her. And then, Lakshana is a Swayamvara. Lakshana and another Satya, they are married to him through Swayamvara. And probably when Bhadra chose him, her brothers have learnt their lesson from others and they did not oppose. They just willingly gave Bhadra to Krishna. And so, and that kind of started, look at the geographical location of Dwaraka, Saurashtra. See, they're almost surrounded by the fathers-in-law of Krishna. If you just leave the Matsya apart, Matsya is not a enemy, or probably they did not have a princess who could marry Krishna at that age. We hear about Uttara, who comes in the next generation, but otherwise it basically, Rukmini's wedding to Krishna defined a new power center at Dwaraka. Right, and we see that Rukmini is not once Rukmini is married to Krishna, right? Of course, after his initial struggle with Krishna, he's somebody who has accepted that relationship. He also gives his daughter to Pradyumna, his granddaughter to Aniruddha. After that, there is a whole dice game that goes wrong again, which is
that was, yes. I mean, I think, yeah. And who would have expected, Balaram? But anyway.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion.
So G.V. Shiv Kumar, our very own Shiv Kumar, who also is one of the authors of the anthology Unsung Valor, he has a question. You've written about Draupadi and Rukmini, two archetypes of our civilization. How do you contrast your creative efforts in etching their characters?
This is interesting question, because I was surprised myself the way the characters chose to appear to me, because before writing Draupadi, I expected her to turn out to be very feisty and aggressive kind of a lady, and she turned out to be a poised, compassionate woman, while
Yes.
Rukmini traditionally has this what do you say, a patient, forbearing picture, and she turned out like a whirlwind. She turned out an epitome of feistiness, and that's how I think Vyasa plays with our minds, the storyteller's minds. So I would also say that Draupadi, to me, she represented as a counterbalancing force, who brought back, who was involved in bringing back a world gone wrong to its rightful place. So her struggle was from the whole wrong to right, where she had to play a counterbalancing force, which is why probably she appeared as that poised lady to me. She's not somebody who loses it. But Rukmini is somebody who took birth in a circumstance which was going wrong, and there was nobody to listen to her, which is why she had to shout at the top of her voice, and take those sharp decisions, those rebellious decisions, which is why she appeared that way.
It's interesting you mention it, because if one looks at it, Draupadi was fated to be born and play the role that she did. Rukmini, on the other hand, takes some conscious decisions and choices, which I think require her personality to be more domineering. However, the way we read or we understand Draupadi's character is slightly different. So it's a fascinating question in itself. And I think, Shivu, I think we'll need to get on a separate call just to talk through this one of these days. So, Sai, before I finish, I want to read up what Pranshu has said and one more comment, and then I will turn it over to you for the final words. So Pranshu says that Satyabhama in the Indonesian Mahabharata is a Panchal princess, as the Indonesian Mahabharata conflates Satyajit and Satyajit. So she's also the sister of Satyaki and thus a strong Pandav ally. And he says that chronological would be problematic as the issue of Krishna's age difference with Shishupal.
Shishupal, yes.
And he visits his aunt when Shishupal is born, and so on. And could Sunita and Shishupal be two different people conflated later? And Sunita is a big ally of the Pandavas and student of Arjun, and the Sabhapar, who vanishes in later Parvas. Another name for Shishupal is Sunita. It's a fascinating part in itself. I think I'll want to go back to the
I would like
Mahabharata
to
tonight.
interview Pranshu actually, on these unknown nuggets
Exactly.
from the various versions of Mahabharata. So there are a lot of these contrasting, portrayals which cause a lot of problems for people like us who want to view it from a rational sense. Like say Pradyumna, he is basically present everywhere along with Krishna, which makes us doubt. I mean, like Pradyumna is Krishna's son. He has his whole journey of getting lost and, growing up at the place of Shambharasura and coming back. And yet he's there, he's mentioned in Draupadi Swayamvara, he's mentioned in the Rajasuya, he's mentioned almost everywhere, and then he mysteriously disappears during Kurukshetra, right? So then these there are these mentions which where I think people like us will have to make a choice and go with whatever supports it, not with any agenda or anything. I would say don't make your decisions based on agenda, but with however the flow commands.
And yes, and Dr. Vasudevan writes that Indic book clubs, publications based on our itihasas and Puranas and such sessions with the authors themselves bring such solace and hope in these pandemic times and assurance that we will bounce back given our strong civilizational tradition. I cannot thank you all enough for this. And thank you, Dr. Vasudevan. Your words do mean a lot, and they are the kind of, I think, encouragement and inspiration that leads us to, double down on our efforts. So, folks, Saiswaroopa's latest book, Rukmini, is an incredible read. I was fortunate enough to read an early copy of it that she had shared with me, and the account is very moving. It is evocative. It's very poignant at times. It touches you. And it is a wonderfully woven story of Rukmini's journey from childhood to the end in whatever way you think of it as the end, without distortions, without misrepresentations, and yet it is storytelling at its finest. So please do pick a copy of that book and do share it, your feedback, your thoughts, your reviews on websites, on Goodreads, on social media, because the only way you can encourage Sai to
And
continue writing such great books is by giving that feedback and by I'm not sure if so. Over to you, Sai.
yes, thank you. Thanks a lot again. And yes, as Abhinav said, we require each of your reviews. Every review makes a difference, and it doesn't just apply to my books, but every Indic author that you see and you want to grow upon narratives that work for Indic civilization, please buy their books and also be a part of this 1,000 reviewer club that Indic Book Club is, the initiative of Indic Book Club. Talk about it in your circles, gift them to like-minded people, review it on Amazon, Flipkart, Goodreads, wherever you buy it, because a review stays there. A word of mouth may have validity or shelf life, but a review stays there forever, and that's how career of the writer as well as the larger narrative stays on. So please keep reviewing our books, and please be a part of Indic Book Club Facebook group. We'll continue to have vibrant discussions. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Abhinav. this a wonderful opportunity. Indic Book Club, I consider it as a home which nurtured me. It's my creative home, and it's my cultural and civilizational home as well. So thank you, Indica. Thank you, Indic Book Club. Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you, viewers.
Thank you, Sai, and thank you all for joining. We'll be putting this video up on YouTube in a couple of days. Thank you.